my own conference. I usually just organize it, but there is a first time for everything. And that kind of suits my recent career pivot where I finally joined the speaker circuit myself. I'm an open source science director at IBM Research. You've seen my colleagues, Anthony, Dean, and Carl, just before me, speak about different aspects of open source for science that we do at IBM Research. I've also been recently elected as the first chair of the new Generative AI Commons, which is a part of Linux Foundation. Technically, it's a committee of LF AI and Data Foundation. But it's probably big enough, so we called it the Commons, and I think it's poised to grow. And obviously, this is the Linux Foundation answer to the question of what AI should be. Linux Foundation is firmly in the camp that it should be open source. I also have this icon here, LLM Avalanche. Who knows what it is? Who's been at LLM Avalanche? A few folks. So LLM Avalanche is it started as a meetup that we put together in June, a week before Databricks Summit. A lot of folks were in town, and it just thought like, I also run and started Bay Area AI, which is the oldest AI meetup in Bay Area, and so we thought, okay, let's kind of do that before. And what happened is in 2 weeks we had. As you can see on the right, we have thousands of people in downtown San Francisco. We had all the leaders of Linux Foundation. We had multiple senior executives from all the Bay Area companies attending this because we managed to do, we call it the shortest, the deepest technical conference on LM. At the time, it was 4 hours, 40 speakers, 3 panels, 3 tracks, and 1,000 attendees. So as you can see, this is a lot of activities we do with open source science with my colleague Tim Banneman, who is also here in the audience. And this is a social technical activity, as you can see. We attend different meetups and generally connect open source developers with scientists to accelerate science, solve hard problems of humanity, and generally advance the field of open source AI. So that's another example. At Open Source Science, we have an initiative called Map of Science. And so what we want to do, we want to take all of open source ever used for science, and we want to find it. We want to map it to actual areas of science where it is actually cited and advancing science. So we want to find all the scientific papers which cite software in general. We want to identify which of this software is open source. So through our collaboration in Open Source Science Interest Group on Map of Science, we were, I think, one of the motivations for Sean Zuckerberg initiative to run a 3-day workshop in the end of October with 60 people from around the world, leading universities, leading labs. And so here's my colleague, Peter Starr, who is the lead of Deep Search, about which you just heard from Carl. He used it to very quickly identify GitHub links in archive.org, but we have enormous amount of research coming out of this, right? And a lot of this stuff is related to generative AI usage in science. So, kind of, if we step back a little bit, right? Why do we need community? And obviously, we're here at a community event. And a lot of folks actually are very happy that, after a long time we came back. We have a tradition of community. So can anybody say, like, why do you guys come here? What do you enjoy about a conference like this? Anybody? Diversity. That's a good one. Meeting people, right? Learning new things, right? Yeah, so a lot of this is all correct, right? But, I think it's another, like, we all could have stayed home and just read a bunch of blogs, right? And a lot of people do that. And we did this before, we'll do it after. But still, we gather together in a room and we, meet a whole bunch of new and old friends at the same time. So when, before I came to America, right, it was 30 years ago, I found this book called America as a Civilization by the author Max Lehrer. So who heard about this book? Who read it? So this book is actually surprisingly not popular anymore, but it's been a bestseller for about 30 years. I think it was published in 1955, and it's been a bestseller. So I highly recommend it. So basically, I learned everything I need to know about America from that book. When I came here, I hit the ground running. There was no surprises for me. And it's still keeps validating. So Max Lehrer basically kind of distilled the interesting features about American culture, and I think it applies to software culture very much. So he said that, in American culture, the ultimate truth is revealed in a public setting. So if you watch a movie about court drama, right, like Oppenheimer, in Oppenheimer, right, the truth, this scenario, I hope I'm not spoiling for anyone. It's like there is a court drama, there is an interrogation, right? It's a public setting, right? There is a public record. If you, enormous amount of movies have, the final scene happens in a church. If it's a kind of a love movie, right, there is like a wedding. So humans gather together and they establish truth collectively, right? And it's especially true about things which are not certain. So obviously, LLMs is an extremely uncertain area. Everybody admits we don't know how they really work. The smartest people, they are very willing, right, to take kind of leaps of imagination. In an example I've seen at last New Ribs in New Orleans. Who's been at the last New Ribs in December? So, Jeff Hinton got his Life Achievement Award there. And right, so the huge hall was full. I think there are tens of thousands of people, right? The room stretches into the horizon. And so everybody packs, the front rows are completely packed. You cannot find any seat. Everybody wants to see Jeff Hinton. Unfortunately, Jeff Hinton comes over the internet and everybody is deflated, of course. You didn't need to try to fight for the seat in the front row. And Jeff Hinton comes in and he basically says, guys, I don't think the brain works like neural networks, like computer networks. I don't think backpropagation actually is what we experience, so I propose henceforth a new framework from forward propagation. And so he came kind of through this proposal where basically we need a lot of positive and negative examples. So, and the idea is that explains sleep, because sleep is the phase where we train with negative examples. So all the nightmares you experience is actually negative examples of something you shouldn't see, right? The brain is trying to generate impossible situations. So, and what was most interesting to me at this point, that it was like a collective kind of gasp, right? Everybody was willing to suspend disbelief, and all the work which we performed with backpropagation was suddenly in question, right? Regardless of 10 years of enormous development, right, multi-billion investment, everybody for a minute, given Jeff Hinton, who is the pioneer and the founder of the field, going out and saying, maybe this is all wrong, right? Everybody was willing to think, maybe it is, right? Because this is not math, this is experimental science. So it really struck me at this point, right? This is why people go to New Ribs. This is why, again, in December, tens of thousands of people will go to New Orleans, because we establish the truth under uncertainty in a collective setting. And also, by kind of looking at what other people are doing, you've seen about 60 talks on this conference. A lot of them are about applications of AI. We don't know exactly where this is going, but we see a bunch of smart people trying different things. So you kind of see the envelope of future, right? And so this is, I think, the key value here, right? You cannot determine by sitting at home and reading 10,000 blogs, right? You will not see immediately which of them are promising, because a lot of them sound very reasonable. Maybe there are people you don't know, but they're from legitimate companies. And it's very hard unless you actually see them speak. If you see people speak live, you quickly form your own judgment. Is this person trustworthy? Do they really do advanced work, right? Or they just repeating some buzzwords, which nobody at this conference does. So this is really good. So this is kind of what I think very important proposition I want to make. First of all, we can establish truth only as a collective group of humans under uncertainty. Second, there are a bunch of claims in AI about performance, about trust, transparency, ethical, responsible AI, and so forth, right? And all these claims are made by various groups. Usually, they're made by government committees, companies, and so forth. And if you look closely, very often these are not legitimate bodies to make these judgments. A company cannot say that their product is trustworthy, because a company has a commercial interest, right? And a single company is not, it can never be an arbiter of trust, performance, ethical AI, and responsibility, no matter how good it is. So we need to establish a process by which we adjudicate the claims of truth, responsibility, something being ethical or not, because ethical AI is determined by a set of questions and tests, and very often adversarial tests, right, which can only be solved in a collective setting. So we need a community, we need to define a community which can adjudicate the claims of trust, performance, and ethical AI. So now I want to kind of do a little bit of a review of some things which we are not talking about often, right? I've not seen the kind of next year of LLM. So we see a lot of people building chats, right? You can chat with different things. You can chat with your documents. You can, like, the whole RAG area, you can chat with your company documents, which is fun. One thing I've never seen yet, and I want to ask anybody, did you see a talk about LLMs? Where somebody presented a working production solution deployed where they replace a substantial part of their business with an LLM, such as a call center or a customer service ticketing department. Did anybody see a talk like this? Probably not. If you've seen a talk like this, let me know, right? But I think we basically see a really big gap here, right? So we're kind of the early adopters of technology. We play with things. A lot of things are now exploratory. A lot of LLM applications are basically our attempts to figure out what we're going to do with them. And a lot of players in this area are startups, right? And so imagine a typical startup. We have several present, and they're great startups. But if you want to replace a customer service in a bank, right, you need to come to a bank and basically say, give me your Oracle database, which keeps financial data. Give me your Salesforce CRM. Give me your logs from your call center. And the probability that the bank will give it to a startup is very, very low, right? It's probably not going to happen immediately, if at all. So if you're a company like OpenAI, right, again, like you need to convince somebody to give you your most intimate data, your financial data, your customer data. And until the enterprise is assured nothing bad is going to happen, they're not going to do it. So we have everybody in holding pattern right now. We do not see actual enterprise deployments. And I think players like IBM and Samsung and big companies and Hitachi and so forth, they're probably best positioned because they already have the trust of their customers, right? It takes really enormous investment in the relationship with the customers to earn their trust. We do not have that yet in the LLM business. And so we need to see this transition from exploratory to production, and that will not happen, I think, in the current setup very easily, because the trust is the elephant in the room. You will not gain the trust of businesses to deploy it. And I kind of posit one of the reasons for this, what's actually going to happen. There is a huge change awaiting us, right? Because if you look at, who heard the phrase digital transformation? Who engaged, who performed a digital transformation? Some of you guys went into some company and said, like, we're going to do a digital transformation on you, right? So it's kind of a little bit passé. It's kind of sounds like something from early 2000s. So I propose the term digital transformation 2.0, which will actually be the true digital transformation. Digital transformation did not yet happen. What we've seen was a very kind of nascent thing. It was something in its infancy, because digital transformation was actually something about document flow. So I was the chief scientist at a company called Nitro, which was a public company in Australia until it was acquired again by a private group. So my chief scientist handle actually corresponds to the actual last job I had at that company. So Nitro was, and is a great provider of PDF digital transformation. So you can go and you can replace a bunch of manual things with a little bit automated things. You can use Word and PDF and so forth. So that was the digital transformation. You have a contract flow, you negotiate a contract, you see the changes very quickly. You use traditional NLP kind of to identify forms and fields and so forth and leases, and you can speed up that, right? So your worker, your low-level clerk, will be empowered, right, by this. So, but if you look at the automobile, people thought that we're going to have electric horses. Now we have electric clerks, right? They are kind of, and with the lamps, the current proposals, let's replace the current low-level clerk with LLM and maybe attached to a clerk. So we'll now have a flying horse. It's still a horse, right? The question really what's going to happen, we do not need whole swaths of this company business. We do not need a bunch of middle managers. Because what middle managers do, they take the strategy from the leadership of the company, then translate it to the stable of clerks implementing this, right? And so currently, if you look at the flow of information through a company, there's a bunch of emails, there's a bunch of Slack. Like people are talking, people spend enormous times in meetings. They're basically forming like this human network, which is extremely suboptimal. There are people who spend their whole lives in meetings, like the human routers. They collect certain inputs and produce certain outputs, and this is very important, right? Because a company, a conservative company, cannot kind of go randomly and do things, at random. So basically, we have now this human network, and this whole human network is probably going to come undone. So the whole layers of this middle management are going to be gone because now that we have the data flowing through the company very differently, we don't need a bunch of human routers. So the strategy can be translated into execution in a different form, right? And so what I think is going to happen, it's very important that we keep kind of track of this, that we don't just think of automating low-level human work, right? We do not come up with flying horses. We have some enormous beasts coming up the pike, right? Which will be transforming the actual structure of these companies. So digital transformation 2.0 will be very interesting. And there is a very important implication for AI. So if this is going to be done through AI, imagine that your company is getting transformed by this, right? The next stage of human in the loop, where humans will be senior managers, 10x engineers, right? There is a vastly different response to copilots, for instance, from engineers. So I think the mediocre engineers are threatened by copilots. The 10x engineers, or like so-called 10x engineers, it was very interesting to observe their reaction. At first, they were very skeptical of this. And then they tried it. They basically said, this is fine. I now can complete my project 10 times faster, right? I can basically let it do all the boilerplate. Because they know what the boilerplate is versus the meaningful piece, right? And a junior engineer might not know this. So I think will be a vastly different response, right? So low-level clerks will probably be much higher level individual contributors with human-in-the-loop capabilities, and the middle management, which is human routers, probably will be gone completely, I think, right, if it's kind of this kind of primitive, old-school middle management. And the senior managers will have much more freedom in trying and executing strategy. But we need transparency. We need to have these systems clearly auditable, right? Because there is a huge question of fairness. There is a huge questions from across the company, how these things drive information through the company. Even now, it's very hard to find this. There's a whole bunch of startups which look at so-called dark data, the data trapped inside corporations. And you cannot know, like you need discovery. There was a whole bunch of startups, a lot of them failed, trying to basically data mine, company email, Slack, and so forth. I think we'll have to see that these systems are auditable and transparent, even if they're close to the outside world. If you're inside the company, there will need to be much more transparency in how the systems will work. So my second claim is that digital transformation 2.0 will drive the openness of these models inside the company, even if it's not open to the outside world. The third thing we're not talking about in Silicon Valley a lot is industrial AI. And I've been fortunate recently to attend this conference called K-First World, which is a gathering of basically big companies employing AI in giant factories, machinery, and so forth. And so companies like Bosch and John Deere and Hitachi and Panasonic, right, they have Samsung, they have a lot of devices. And now they're thinking hard, how do we empower these devices with AI? And the way they're thinking about it is very different from what, again, we usually see in Silicon Valley. It's all software-based, right? If you want to, for instance, build a smart building, so Bosch is in the business of, digital twins now, right? So they are kings of IoT. So they build a building, and also they provide power tools. Let's say you want to use a power tool, like a power drill, to drill into a smart building. So what do you do to avoid hitting an electric line? You have the BIM, building information model. And the power tool actually knows, it connects to it, right? And it knows not to drill, it will stop. If you try to hit the power line, it will actually stop. So this is what we can do right now, right? In the future, there will be enormous amount of this intelligence. Predictive maintenance has been the buzzword already 5 years ago. And all of these tools will need to have certain intelligence, but the kind of intelligence they will have is vastly different from a dialogue of ChatGPT, because a power drill does not need to know the meaning of life. It just needs to drill, right? And it needs to do a very focused set of tasks that a tool does. Or let's say an industrial robot on a conveyor assembly belt, of a Toyota factory. It needs to know a lot of different things, right? Like the cars can come in assembled improperly, right? The other humans or robots can make mistakes. So you need to do a lot of different things autonomously, but you have very specific context, you have very specific goal. So a lot of folks in this area, they do not actually think that we're going to end up with large language models. They think we'll end with something called SSAs, small specialized agents. And the agents themselves will be empowered to make decisions in a very specific context. And so what they really want, they want ownership. They want to own this little model which is installed on their tool. They want it to be small because the tools are small and cheap, and you cannot put iPhone quality bionic chip into them, right? They need to be compact, and they need to do one thing, and they need to do it well. They need to actually be efficient, right? They need to do, usually there is no very philosophical questions about these tools. They usually do not need to be an example of responsible AI. They need to drill into a building, right? But they need to do it very well. So there is this important drive. And again, this augurs for open source AI, right? Because all these manufacturers, they don't want to pay OpenAI, and they don't have any use for the OpenAI models. They need to build their own specific models for their specific tools, and they need to deploy them, right? But they're not a software business, right? They produce tools. So they probably, like automotive Linux in Linux Foundation, they want to gather together. They need to develop standards, tools, tool chains to produce these models and deploy them. So I think this is another very important vector, rarely talked here because we do not have a large industrial base, but this is happening around the world, which is important to keep in mind. And recently, I think it's kind of percolating up our community. So Clement DeLange, the CEO of Hugging Face, he basically says the prediction is most companies will realize smaller models are essential. So he generally echoed this as of last month. So now kind of the pieces of, it all comes to kind of the components, right? What do we need to pay attention to? So generative AI generally deals with data, models, applications, right? And also this piece of community validation, which I mentioned, it's not explicitly articulated, and I propose that we always keep it explicit. Right? You cannot talk about technology of AI without community validation. Community validation should be a key part, because ultimately the decisions of AI will always be subject to human validation, in real time or post factum. So, there is a kind of set of tasks we need to do as a community. It's emerging. For training, we need to know where the data is coming from. I think there were several talks here which touched on this. It's often overlooked, but we need to know exactly where the data is coming from. Right, because the data defines the biases and risks. I think there was a lot of discussion about models. Linux Foundation is finalizing a badging scheme where we'll give badges, bronze, silver, and gold, to different levels of openness, which is parameter weights, that and training scripts, and then ultimately an architecture, and then everything plus the data, right, which is the gold. So we hope we'll push people towards openness by clearly labeling their models, right, and making it very visible that they hide training scripts or they do not deploy, do not share the training data, right? It will be very clear they cannot make claims of openness until everything is open. And in September in Bilbao, there was an open source summit where we established this commons. So there are 4 work streams. There are basically data, models, frameworks, and education, right? And it's very traditional Linux Foundation group. So I invite everybody to collaborate with us. Generally, the structure is, you need to have a member of Linux Foundation for AI and data in the commons, but anybody can invite a guest. So if you have strong opinions about open source AI and want to contribute to our work streams, please reach out to me. I can invite you as a guest, and we meet monthly on Zoom as everybody else, and we advance these work streams. So please reach out if you want to participate in this. And there is a conference now for AI development called AI.dev. It's in San Jose, December 12 and 13. So that's a very new conference. We're spreading the word. And a lot of this discussion will continue at that AI.dev conference. And finally, I think, Generative AI Commons is one thing, but we have many others. We have ML Commons, which is the benchmarking nonprofit, which keeps performance benchmarks. ML Perf. Who heard about ML Commons here? Yeah, that's a very interesting group, right? The cloud providers needed a common benchmark, so they can basically, again, adjudicate claims of performance in an objective fashion. So they came up with this benchmark ML Perf, and then the ML Commons was formed to host it. And I think that's the way we're going to do trust and ethical AI benchmarks. First of all, we need to formulate ethical problems as code to reason about them without kind of word against word. And then we need to put them in a place where everybody can trust the benchmarks are run in a trusted fashion, right? So I think ML Commons is a very good place to put benchmarks in. Then, we obviously have a lot of foundation models in different scientific areas. Currently, some of them are put in Hugging Face. I think there will be a lot of niche and industry-specific bodies thinking how foundation models for climate or materials should be used and built and so forth. We have Partnership for AI, which is doing a lot of kind of political lobbying and so forth and policy thinking. There is this New Frontier Model Forum, which is probably the closed source AI answer to open source, which we're going to see how it works out. And all the major government bodies have OECD and World Forum. They have working groups, and I think some people even go to the APEC summit this week in San Francisco. There is a discussion there as well. Yeah, so that's basically all I have, and I'm thinking I basically have 3 minutes here, right? And yeah, so I can take like a question or two here, and then I'll be available at the Q&A island. Thank you.
Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Here's a question.
Sorry.
Raise my hand until after you looked away. Okay. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your opinions on open source and safety and how those are compatible. Personally, safety is not my big issue with AI, but since you mentioned it, I'm really curious how you tackle it.
Right, so I think everybody, right, raised this concern that the models hallucinate and, they recommend people do bad things or whatever. It's a very general question, right? So I think as far as we know, we cannot solve this problem at the root for large language models or foundation models. And some people even posit that it will never be possible to avoid hallucinations. Hallucination is a feature of this architecture. So some researchers go as far to say this is a dead end, right? It's impressive, it's a parlor trick, but in 5 years, we're going to be done with this, and something else will be the new AI, right? That's a legitimate argument. Other people say they follow this SSM, small specialized model route, and they say we don't need a thing, right, which starts making up biographies or papers, because we're going to scope it down very narrowly and tie it down to a specific task. Right? And then so the same industrial AI folks who do this, they say, if startup kids in San Francisco think that they invented technology safety, they should look back 100 years and look how industrial safety was done, right? Like if you look at the plane has enormous amount of safety features engineered into it. Even the old locomotives, they have this dead machinist handle, right? If somebody falls dead through a heart attack, and releases the handle, the thing will stop. So the industrial safety goes back at least 100 years. And there is a lot of knowledge in various industries, right? If you go to Kaiser, they'll scan your bracelet every single time so they don't feed you, their own medication because they're mostly suffering through medical errors. So we need to look at all of this, right? Like if you deploy something in an industry, in the real world, that area of the real world has probably safety measures already developed, which you need to absorb. You can just randomly deploy technology, right? So I think there are different routes to do this, but they go through specific examination of what is the context and safety measures instead of general kind of hand waving about safety, right? Which is often kind of where it's going. All right, I think we're at time, so I'll be at the Q&A, and thank you.